The final weekend of September has provided us content gold here on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel on the Matt Barrie Show, presented by Allstate. The things we're going to talk about today, so good. Georgia and Alabama, that was an all-time classic. We'll get into that. Plus, Colorado, you had better start paying attention to the Buffs because they could be in contention for a Big 12 championship. That, plus Clemson, the ACC, the Big 12, all of it in play here on the Matt Barrie Show, presented by Allstate. It is time now to check in with Paul Finebaum, presented by Allstate. Paul, good morning. Let's put it this way: 28-0. I thought I was going to kick, or 28-0. I thought I was going to sit back, relax, and enjoy the fun. Dan Mullen looks at me. True story. He goes, Matt, there is way too much time on the clock for a team like Georgia. And looky there, we had an all-time classic from two teams that have given us all-time classics.
Yeah, and Matt, I don't want to get caught up in the moment. I mean, there's still people at bars in Tuscaloosa right now. So, as we do this, but I think in my 4 decades of watching the SEC, it may have been the most dramatic game. I mean, it didn't have that walk off, but it came close to having a walk off. But it had everything else. Anytime you can see those type of swings. I mean, imagine if Alabama had lost that game. I tell you what it reminded me of a little bit, the 2008 Alabama Georgia,
Yep.
when Georgia was number, I think, 1 or 2 in the country. Alabama went up almost by the same score. Georgia had a shot at the end to win. It was just vintage. Whoever did the ABC SEC deal may not have gotten enough money for it because. I mean, I just cannot imagine anyone turning away from it. There was so much there.
Now, I wouldn't have faulted them if they turned away from it. I think at one point, and then again, it got to like 30-7.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
you think, well, wait a second. Now, and Mullen would also point out, he goes, no. 30-7. People love hopping in and watching Georgia get their ass kicked.
Yeah, good
And
point.
so you've got the car wreck crowd. But, Paul, it's one of those rare instances when you look at a game, it was so dominating at first for Alabama. And as I'm sitting there going, wow, Kalen DeBoer is making this look easy. He's calling a hell of a ball game. Jalen Milroe is the best player on the planet. But it's one of those instances where you leave a game, Paul, and I'm like, well, those are two of the best 12 teams in the country. Both of them are going to the playoff because Carson Beck looked awful. And credit to him and Kirby Smart for stabilizing enough to not only get back in the game, but take a 1 point
Yeah.
lead late.
And that's the hardest thing in any sport, golf, tennis, whatever. When you come all the way back, you have to go ahead. Otherwise, you just completely crumble. And they went ahead, and I mean, I will ask the world, can we stop? Everyone in America and some parts of Arkansas know that Ryan Williams is only 17 years old. I mean, we get it. We've heard that a
Oh,
few
yeah.
thousand million times. But he made the play. I mean, you tell me. I mean, that's some of the greatest moves I've ever seen on one single play.
Yeah, and look, I'm guilty of it too because I think I said it during halftime and college football final 15 times. I find it absurd that in the history of Julio Jones, Amari Cooper, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, name all the legendary Alabama receivers, this kid's the youngest, and he's already doing this. I mean, it's frightening thing about this, Paul, that you have that young man on Alabama as their go-to guy as a true freshman.
Yeah, that was a concern. Not anymore. And yeah, and the combination of the athleticism between passer and receiver there is really beyond. It's just still hard for me to believe a year ago. Tommy Reese, the offensive coordinator, pulled Jalen Milroe. I mean, it's just. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what. I think he's in Cleveland or someplace right now. The coach ought to walk down and say, "You're dismissed." I don't care what you've done here, but he probably should be dismissed for what he's done up there as well.
You know what? Speaking of that, because you guys were doing SEC Nation yesterday, it's from Auburn, and then Auburn another
Oh,
steel
we,
victory
got,
from
we
the
don't have
jaws of
time for
defeat.
that.
But but Nick Saban on College Game Day actually finally just came out and said it. He's like, I had to go to my offensive staff after it wasn't working with Milroe early and say, hey, here's who we have as a quarterback and an athlete. Here's how you're catering the offense to him because we have no other choice. And they did that. And obviously, they went to the college football playoff last year. But that's my segue into anyone who thought that we were going to get a, hey, Nick Saban's not at Alabama anymore, break from the tide. Kalen DeBoer's got in there and is like, you know what, dude, I'm an offensive genius and I've got the Alabama resources. You guys are screwed.
Yeah, I'm not sure. When I've seen Nick Saban's offense look like that. Of course, he was a defensive coach. But yeah, I mean, there's so many elements to the game, and in the end, I don't think any of them matter at this point because Georgia is not Georgia can live with that loss.
Right.
Uh, they may be the only. I mean, they're not going 9-3, but if they did, that might be enough for that. That's that one we've been talking about because how can you penalize a team for doing what they did in that stadium in that environment? But I still can't figure out why Georgia can't get off after the opening kickoff. I mean, this is now a real problem for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they nearly it nearly was insurmountable last night. Ultimately, it cost them the game because they started the Clemson game the same way. But Alabama just looks just beyond comprehension, and I think we've been hyping the wrong game on October 19th, Matt. As great as Georgia, Texas, what about Alabama at Tennessee? I mean, that might be the first 5.5 hour game in college football history.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, last night for a little behind the scenes on what we do there at ESPN in studio. So we had college football final live at midnight, but we also had to take care of the halftime of Utah, Arizona. Those clocks were colliding with each other because of how slow the Alabama Georgia game ended up being at the end. We're like, one of these things has to end because there's about to be 2 television shows that are on live that we're not going to be able to handle. But Alabama, Tennessee, look, Paul, going into Saturday, and I think we kind of alluded to it a little bit last week on the Matt Barrie Show presented by Allstate, that no one had really played anybody, right? We hadn't really learned a lot about anyone. And final weekend of September, what we learned yesterday, things are starting to shape up now that conference play is in. You can't convince me Georgia, Alabama, throw them in. I mean, barring anything catastrophic, those are 2 of the best 12 teams in the country, and it's not even close.
But there are some doubts, and a school that I have been incredibly high on is Ole Miss, and you I actually said on Saturday morning that let's quit propping up Kentucky because of a loss. Well, now we can prop them up because of a win, but that game was so much about Ole Miss, and their road got very very nerve-wracking. Missouri has not looked great. Oklahoma, I know I'm scatter shooting here, Matt, but that defense in the final few minutes against Auburn showed me that they can upset someone. I'm not saying it's Texas, but they're a dangerous team off defensively. And as far as and maybe it's because I spent 2 days in Auburn, but man, just take a look at the Auburn schedule and show me how Hugh Freeze is going to have a winning record, okay?
Yeah, I mean, look, you just rattled off a bunch of SEC teams, and that yesterday, Oklahoma being one of them, coming back against Michael Hawkins, the young quarterback, the pick 6 really paced the way. But back to Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss for a second, because you ID a team every year, and we've found a few of them. It's like, all right, they have a lot of talent, and they have a very favorable schedule. Losing to Kentucky at home wasn't one of them. That was the highest ranked road win for Kentucky since the late 1970s. And I think people were judging Kentucky because of the South Carolina beatdown, where they played Georgia close and they hand Ole Miss their first loss in stunning fashion. And now you got to wonder, okay, a lot of us said Ole Miss, they're a 1-loss team, maybe 2-loss team. They're getting to the college football playoff. You look at that road now, they're at South Carolina, at LSU, Oklahoma looks favorable or like formidable. Arkansas, Georgia.
Yeah, no, it's I told you a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Florida that probably the one thing that would keep Lane Kiffin away from Florida would be being in the CFP. Okay, I'd like to re-record that statement because he might be a little more available.
I mean, you think that's a product of a non, because Lane said he's like, I'm worried our schedule hasn't gotten us ready for SEC play.
They were not ready.
Is this a product of non-conference schedule?
I think so. I mean, Wake Forest was their game, and they got nothing out of it. And they just I don't think they were ready for the physicality of Kentucky, and it just seemed to undo them.
Has anyone done more with anything than Mark Stoops in Lexington?
No, but he just always manages to make it difficult to say what you just said. You know, he'll go out there and almost beat Georgia, but he just looks terrible against South Carolina, and he's a frustrating coach to cover because he's one of those guys you have to look at the big picture. You can't just cherry pick. Um, but Kentucky knew what they were doing. I mean, he's going to be a lifer there, even though he was about to be on the tarmac last year at Texas A&M.
Yep. Yeah, right. He had the Texas A&M job allegedly. Then there was fan revolt. Allegedly, they end up with Mike Elko, who, by the way, they get the win against Arkansas, 21-17. Oklahoma, again, we brought them up. I mean, there are so many avenues now because Texas goes into the bye week, and then they have the big one against Georgia. But you started to see, okay, that's one of the best teams in the country. That's one of the best teams in the country. Now you start looking at conferences across the country outside the SEC, and the Big 12 is absolutely intoxicated right now. You've got BYU 5-0 overall. They're 2-0 in the league. Texas Tech's 2-0 in the league. Don't look now, but Colorado and Coach Prime, who I thought were going to be fine, they went on the road to the bounce house against a really good offense, Gus Malzahn, KJ Jefferson, and the Knights. Paul, they're 4-1 and at the top of the Big 12 standings.
And of all the schools that impressed me the most on Saturday, it was Colorado. I mean, they went someplace I thought would be incredibly difficult, and they won. They won just in dominating fashion. And you know, I don't need to add to the Travis Hunter situation, but yeah, as someone who has been very critical of Deion Sanders, I mean, I have to say what he has managed this team quite well. In spite of all the bullets and all the attacks and all the criticism, some of it coming from me, and I give him enormous credit. I don't think very many people thought this was possible, other than maybe a group of sycophants out there in Boulder. But they're back to being a legitimate story for the first time. Last year, it wasn't legitimate. It was
There you go.
Early on this season, it was drive-by, but Colorado is a legitimate factor right now in college football, and there's no denying it.
Let me put it this way, because you and I have said the same thing. Like, if Coach Prime would just focus on building a program instead of building a brand, maybe they'll get somewhere. I think he started to do that. Is it now more important for him than ever to say less? Because you're turning a lot of people's opinions, yours, mine. Some of the national media is going to be like, wow, wait a second, they might be in contention for the Big 12. You don't want to saturate that with peak Coach Prime. You almost just want to lay back with that a little bit and just let people start coming to you instead of you going to them.
Yeah, I mean, we no matter what we say one week, I feel we look at things objectively, and we're both saying the same thing. I mean, I sat there late yesterday in admiration of what they were doing because it was so dominating. It was a master class, and he takes away from that when he does the things that he does. So let the work speak for itself. And I think everyone in college football who knows anything, who's not just barking from trees, understands now finally what this program is right at the moment and can be. And I think it's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, watch out for the Big 12. That's going to be entertaining as we get into October. The Big 10, obviously, we know the players there. I do want to focus on the ACC for a minute, because the wild game on Friday night with Miami and Virginia Tech, you're like, uh-oh, here goes Miami losing the game they probably shouldn't. They're in play. Somehow Duke's undefeated. Oh, by the way, Paul, Clemson has found their groove again with their lone loss to Georgia.
Yeah, and back to Georgia for 1 second. That is now a calling card for the Dogs. They really need Clemson to keep going, because if Clemson can for the most part run the table with only maybe one loss, Georgia looks a lot better if they're not the SEC champion. But I think of the ACC, I think of the great stories, and then the most obvious ones, Florida State. I mean, there are no words for them.
Was that, we asked the question, was that rock bottom against new SMU, Kevin Jennings? I mean, Rhett Lashlee just absolutely raced Florida State.
I mean, we heard SMU. You've seen them. Would be a interesting factor, and they are. And Florida State is just we'll check back with you next year. And I'm not going to waste a lot of time on beating a dead horse, but every week it's harder to watch the train wreck that is Mack Brown.
Oh, I was going to bring it up, and I was going to kind of weave into there, 25 miles an hour, not 75 miles an hour, but it was 20-0.
Yeah.
I mean, it was 20-0. Manny Diaz, a coach that was fired by Mack
Yeah.
when he was at Texas. I mean, you feel bad for Mack because he's a Hall of Famer. You just don't know where that thing's headed.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not going to waste it. I mean, that's a pretty big rivalry in about a 10 square mile area of North Carolina, between Duke and North Carolina. You can't lose like that. And yeah, I mean, I think his path is to finish the season and do whatever he would like the rest of his life. That doesn't involve being a head coach at North Carolina.
It's a shame too, because he built that thing back up. Sam Howell, Drake May. I mean, it's like Max still got it, but it's going to echo loudly based on what he said a week ago. So the ACC is another one that's competitive. Paul, let's leave the beautiful people with this. As we embark on a new month, first semester of the season's over, give me your biggest surprise in September.
I am surprised how well Alabama has played. And I know that's kind of going to the very top of the Christmas tree. But if you had given me the stats for Alabama, including the Georgia game, I would have said you're out of your mind. I cannot believe how good they are. Alabama didn't just beat Georgia. Alabama is for the first time in my mind this season a legitimate national championship contender, and more than a contender. I mean, they look like one of the two or three teams to beat.
Yeah, the college football world wakes up this morning. They're like, oh, hell, you mean like Nick Saban going away wasn't going to help everybody? No, because now you've got a guy that's an offensive innovator with Alabama's toys and resources. Buckle up. And then the biggest disappointment in the first half of the season.
To me, it has to be Florida State. I didn't think they would be great, but 1-4. I mean, Matt, there's no way you can look at a team that starts the season in the top 10 with all the hype and all the blather coming from last year and expect them to be where they are. I mean, that program has cratered.
Yeah, if I had to answer the surprise thing, I'd say the Big 12 and ACC as conferences being competitive down to the stretch and all the teams that are in play, which makes our job really, really fun. And yeah, Florida State, based on what they did a year ago.
And one more thing, Matt, is
yeah.
the biggest surprise, I think, personally, is the fact that Kalen DeBoer is actually doing better at his job right now than Nick Saban is at GameDay. And that is the biggest upset, because nobody has done better than Saban on TV except Kalen DeBoer coaching where Saban used to roam.
Yeah, Saban's a television star and he's flawless at it. It's like, wait, this guy's going to be good at that too. And DeBoer's like, hang on a second. I'm going to show you the greatest transition of power in college football history. And here we are as we wrap up September. Matt Barrie Show presented by Allstate, the great Paul Finebaum. We will be here with you every single week until the ball kicks in sometime in January 20th or whatever. But if we've learned one thing, two things, maybe three things in September, same as it ever was at Alabama, Georgia's still really, really good. And oh my God, Coach Prime, is it going to happen? We'll find out when we kick next week. College football YouTube channel, The Matt Barrie Show, presented by Allstate, Paul Finebaum and Matt Barrie.